a wealthy doctor with 81 luxury cars, a Parisian model who lived like a modern-day Cinderella, and one cold February morning in Florida, when she was found floating face-up at the bottom of her own swimming pool, her arms spread wide, a single designer sandal beside her in the water. This is the story of Dr. Adam Frock and his wife Samira, a case that would expose the dark underbelly of wealth glamour and a marriage that ended in tragedy beneath the glittering surface of their Florida mansion. Dr. Adam Frock was a successful podiatrist in Tallahassee, Florida, a man who built a thriving medical practice and amassed extraordinary wealth. His lifestyle was extravagant, almost theatrical in its excess. He owned approximately 81 registered vehicles ranging from exotic sports cars to luxury SUVs. He invested in multiple properties across the southeastern United States. He frequented casinos, strip clubs, and lived with the kind of flamboyance that turned heads in even the wealthiest neighborhoods. But behind the facade of success, there were shadows. Adam was being investigated for Medicaid fraud. His income didn't come solely from his podiatry practice. He was known for his volatile temper, his fondness for strip clubs, and his habit of spending money as quickly as he made it. Friends and family would later describe him as someone who could be charming one moment and explosively angry the next. Samira Frock came from a different world entirely. Born in Madagascar, she had moved to Paris, where she worked as a model and aspired to be a singer. Friends described her voice as beautiful, her ambitions as genuine. She was a single mother when she met Adam Frock during a trip he made to Paris while separated from his second wife. Their connection was immediate and intense. They married first in Las Vegas, then held a second ceremony in Madagascar. Samira moved to the United States, leaving behind her life in Paris for what seemed like a fairy tale. She and Adam had 2 daughters together, and they settled into a massive mansion in the exclusive Golden Eagle neighborhood of Tallahassee. The house was a monument to excess, decorated with gold fixtures, marble, and even taxidermied exotic animals. Not stuffed toys, but actual preserved animals. From the outside, they appeared to be a power couple, living the American dream. Samira embraced the role of celebrity mother, dressing her daughters in designer clothes, throwing elaborate birthday parties, and dreaming of launching them as child stars. She documented their lives on social media, creating an image of perfection and glamour. But the reality was far darker. The marriage was troubled from the beginning, marked by infidelity control and allegations of violence from both sides. Adam continued his pattern of infidelity, carrying on affairs with multiple women, many of them dancers from strip clubs he frequented. He fathered a child with one of his mistresses. His gambling continued, as did his lavish spending. According to Samira's friends, he was controlling and violent. They recounted incidents where Samira claimed Adam had physically assaulted her, throwing her onto beds, striking her during arguments about his affairs. Adam told a different story. He claimed Samira was the violent one, that she was jealous, unstable, and prone to alcohol-fueled rages. He produced videos he had secretly recorded of Samira yelling during a family trip, which he presented as evidence of her instability. He claimed that Samira had once choked him to the point where he nearly lost consciousness. She had even been arrested once for domestic violence, though the charges were later dropped. The truth, as is often the case in these situations, likely fell somewhere in a gray area where both parties contributed to a toxic, destructive relationship. For Samira, life in America was isolating. She had no family in the United States. Her English was limited. She had no independent career. She was entirely dependent on Adam financially for her home and for access to their children. She didn't fully understand the American legal system and struggled to find adequate legal representation. She was trapped in a gilded cage, surrounded by luxury but with no real freedom or security. As the marriage deteriorated, both parties filed for divorce. The custody battle that followed was brutal. Initially, Adam gained temporary custody of their daughters, a devastating blow to Samira. But gradually, the legal tide began to turn in her favor. She started winning custody arrangements, gained rights to stay in the family home, and was positioned to receive substantial alimony and property settlements. For Adam, who had always been in control, always been the one with power and money, this reversal was intolerable. He faced the prospect of losing his children, losing a significant portion of his wealth, and losing control over Samira. Then came the sex tape. One of Adam's former mistresses contacted Samira, offering to sell her a sex tape for approximately $4,000. The tape showed Adam engaged in sexual acts with this woman. Samira watched it and was devastated. Friends later recalled that she was in shock, disgusted, and terrified. She told friends that she couldn't believe what she had seen, that she felt utterly betrayed. More ominously, she expressed fear that Adam, backed into a corner with this damning evidence, would become dangerous. She told friends that Adam had threatened to kill her. She said she was afraid for her life. Adam, for his part, was facing potential ruin. The sex tape, combined with the custody loss, the financial settlements, and the ongoing Medicaid fraud investigations, meant that everything he had built was at risk. The night of February 22nd began ordinarily enough. The family had been out. Security cameras at the entrance to the Golden Eagle community captured them returning around 11 p.m. Samira was driving the family's Hummer. Adam followed in a black SUV. At the gate, the camera recorded Adam getting out of his vehicle and approaching Samira's driver's side door. She slammed the door shut, a visible sign of tension, though Adam would later insist there had been no argument. According to Adam's account, Samira had consumed nearly 2 bottles of champagne that evening and was heavily intoxicated, slurring her words. He claimed they talked, then had sexual intercourse in the living room, and went to bed together around 1:30 a.m. There was a critical problem with this account. The autopsy would later reveal that Samira had 0 alcohol in her system. When confronted with this inconsistency, Adam changed his story, suggesting it might have been non-alcoholic champagne. The following morning, around 8 a.m., security cameras recorded Adam leaving the Golden Eagle community with both daughters in the car. The girls were wearing their pajamas, which was highly unusual. Samira was known for dressing her daughters elaborately, almost obsessively. They were always perfectly dressed, hair done looking like child models. But that morning they left in their nightclothes without the usual careful preparation. Adam would later explain that Samira wanted a few days off from being a mother. He said she asked him to take the girls to Panama City or Miami so she could have the house to herself. Relax, get her hair done, her nails done, get a waxing treatment. He said it was her idea. Around 11 a.m., handyman Gerald Gardner arrived at the property with his 13-year-old son to do some work. They went directly to the pool area. What they found would haunt them forever. Samira was at the bottom of the deep end of the pool, lying on her back, her arms spread in a V shape, her face turned upward. The water was extremely cold. Near the pool edge, carefully positioned, was a black designer sandal with rhinestone embellishments and a section of garden hose. Another sandal floated in the water. Gardner immediately called 911, his voice panicked and horrified. In that call, he said something chilling. "She's dead. I think he finally killed her." The scene appeared to the investigators who arrived to be staged. It looked like someone had attempted to create the appearance of an accident, a scenario where Samira had tripped over the hose, lost her sandal, and fallen into the pool. But there were problems with this narrative. Significant problems that would become the foundation of the prosecution's case. First, Samira was terrified of water and could not swim. Her close friends confirmed this repeatedly. She avoided the pool area. She and her friends would joke about how neither of them knew how to swim. For a woman who was afraid of water and couldn't swim to somehow end up at the bottom of the deep end of a pool was deeply suspicious. Second, there was Adam's reaction when he was first questioned by investigators. One of the very first things he said before he had been told any details about how Samira was found was, "I just hope she didn't trip over that hose with those cheap flip-flops and fall in the pool." Investigators found this deeply disturbing. How could Adam, who claimed to have left the house at 8 a.m. and been hours away, know about the specific arrangement of the hose and the sandals at the scene? This detail they believed was evidence that Adam had staged the scene himself. As the investigation progressed, inconsistencies in Adam's story multiplied. The scratches on his face, which he attributed to his 10-month-old daughter, seemed too deep and deliberate to be caused by an infant. The story about Samira being heavily intoxicated was completely disproven by toxicology. The unusual decision to take the children out in their pajamas, breaking from their usual elaborate morning routine, suggested a rushed departure. Perhaps most damning when asked why he left with the children, Adam claimed Samira wanted time alone. But in the weeks and months before her death, Samira had been fighting desperately for custody. She was winning. She was finally getting her children back. The idea that she would voluntarily send them away for days made no sense. Then there was Gerald Gardner, the handyman who found the body. He was the first person to suggest that Adam was responsible. In his 911 call, his immediate reaction was that this was murder, not an accident. Adam attempted to deflect suspicion onto Gardner, suggesting that Gardner and Samira might have been having an affair, that Gardner was motivated by jealousy. Investigators thoroughly examined this possibility and found no evidence to support it. They concluded that Gardner's suspicion of Adam stemmed simply from his knowledge of the couple's troubled marriage, not from any personal involvement. The autopsy results were conclusive in one respect and frustratingly inconclusive in another. The medical examiner determined that Samira died from a combination of blunt force trauma to the head and drowning. She had been struck with sufficient force to cause a head injury, likely from a fist, a hard surface like concrete, or a blunt object. She was then thrown into the pool while still alive, where she drowned. There was no evidence of suicide, no drugs in her system, no alcohol. This was not an accident. The medical examiner ruled it a homicide. However, there was one critical detail: the medical examiner could not determine the exact time of death. The pool water was extremely cold, between 56 and 57 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly 13 to 14 degrees Celsius. This cold temperature dramatically slowed decomposition and prevented the typical signs that would help establish time of death. There was minimal skin wrinkling on the hands and feet, making it impossible to determine how long Samira had been in the water. The potential window for time of death was frustratingly wide, anywhere from after the family returned home around 11 p.m. on February 22nd until she was discovered around 11 a.m. on the 23rd. This meant that theoretically, Samira could have died after Adam left, with the children opening the door to the possibility of another perpetrator. This uncertainty was compounded by a neighbor's testimony. One neighbor reported that between 10:25 and 10:45 a.m. on the morning Samira was found, he and his daughter had walked past the Froch house and seen a tall, slender black woman with long hair standing in the driveway. He was certain it was Samira because he had never seen anyone else at the house who matched that description. If this testimony was accurate, it meant Samira was alive after Adam had left, potentially exonerating him and suggesting someone else was responsible. The prosecution believed the neighbor was mistaken about the date, but this testimony created reasonable doubt, a fact that the defense would exploit throughout the trial. As the investigation continued, police received information from an unexpected source, a jailhouse informant. Dale Folsom was a career criminal with more than 40 prior convictions, a long history of drug addiction, and a reputation as a professional snitch who had provided information to prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentences multiple times before. He had shared a cell with Adam Froch after Adam's arrest. According to Folsom, Adam had confessed to him. Adam allegedly told Folsom that he and Samira had gotten into a physical altercation, that he had struck her with a golf club, causing her to fall, and that in a panic he had thrown her body into the pool. Adam allegedly said he hadn't meant to kill her, that things had just gotten out of control. According to Folsom, Adam asked him to return to the house after his release and retrieve the golf club. Investigators did find a golf club in the house. Dear was present on the club. But there were serious questions about this evidence. Was this truly the murder weapon, or simply a golf club that Samira had touched at some point before her death? The golf club had been found long after Samira's death, after the house had been cleaned out in preparation for sale. Adam's father, an avid golfer, had been the one to clear out the house. Adam argued that his father would never have left a golf club casually leaning against a window, that the club must have been planted by investigators. The medical examiner's analysis of the golf club added another layer of complexity. The doctor testified that Samira's head injury was not consistent with being struck by a golf club. A golf club typically causes lacerations, significant bleeding, and a different pattern of injury. Instead, the wound appeared more consistent with being punched or having her head struck against a hard, flat surface, like the concrete pool deck. The forensic evidence suggested that the golf club was not the murder weapon, which significantly undermined Dale Folsom's credibility. However, the prosecution argued that the confession itself, regardless of the weapon described, was still valuable evidence that Adam had admitted to striking Samira and throwing her into the pool. The motive for murder, prosecutors argued, was clear and compelling. Adam was facing financial catastrophe. Samira was winning the divorce proceedings and stood to gain the house's substantial alimony custody of their daughters and a significant portion of their assets. The sex tape represented a potentially devastating piece of evidence that could be used against him in court and could destroy his reputation. The ongoing Medicaid fraud investigation threatened his medical career. He was a man accustomed to control, to wealth, to getting what he wanted. And suddenly he was losing everything. Samira's friends testified that she had told them Adam had threatened to kill her, that she was afraid of what he might do when backed into a corner. Adam's defense team countered with a different narrative. They painted Samira as jealous, unstable, and volatile. They highlighted the domestic violence arrest. They emphasized the uncertainty around time of death. They argued that the neighbor's testimony proved Samira was alive after Adam left. They attacked Dale Folsom's credibility, pointing out his extensive criminal record and history of providing testimony in exchange for reduced sentences. They argued that the golf club evidence was inconclusive at best, planted at worst. The trial was intensely emotional. Friends of Samira testified about her fear, about the threats she had received, about the violence she had endured. They described a woman who loved her children desperately, who was fighting to build a life for them, who was terrified but determined to escape her marriage. Investigators testified about the staged crime scene, about the inconsistencies in Adam's statements, about his knowledge of details he shouldn't have known. Gerald Gardner recounted the horror of finding Samira's body, his immediate conviction that Adam was responsible. Dale Folsom testified about the alleged confession, though his testimony was attacked vigorously by the defense. The medical examiner explained the injuries, the cause of death, and the frustrating inability to pinpoint when Samira died. In closing arguments, the prosecution painted a picture of that final night. A confrontation escalated. Adam struck Samira. She fell unconscious or semi-conscious, and then he made a decision. He dragged her to the pool and threw her in while she was still alive, staging the scene to look like an accident with the hose and the sandals. That decision to throw her into the water while she still lived, the prosecution argued, was first-degree murder. The defense emphasized reasonable doubt. The uncertain time of death, the neighbor's testimony, the unreliable jailhouse informant, the golf club that didn't match the injuries, the possibility of an alternative perpetrator. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. They found Adam Froch guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The reaction was mixed. Prosecutors described it as justice for a woman who had no family in America to advocate for her, whose voice had been silenced but was finally heard. Samira's friends expressed grief mixed with relief that the truth, as they understood it, had been acknowledged. Adam maintained his innocence. He continues to insist that he is the victim of a conspiracy, that witnesses lied, that evidence was planted, that he was wrongfully convicted. The most tragic victims of this case are the 2 young daughters who lost both parents. Their mother is dead murdered in their own home. Their father is in prison for the rest of his life. They will grow up without either parent, raised by relatives forever, marked by this tragedy. Friends of Samira have expressed hope that when the girls are older, they will come to understand that their mother loved them deeply, that she was more than the glamorous social media image, that she was a woman who dreamed of giving them a better life, and who fought ultimately unsuccessfully to protect them. The case of Adam and Samira Froch raises profound questions about domestic violence, particularly in affluent communities where wealth and privilege can obscure abuse. It highlights the vulnerability of immigrant women, particularly those who lack language skills, family support, legal knowledge, and financial independence. Samira's story is a reminder that money and luxury do not protect against violence, that isolation can trap someone just as surely as poverty, perhaps more insidiously, because the abuse is hidden behind a facade of perfection. The legal questions linger as well. How much weight should be given to jailhouse informants who trade testimony for leniency? When time of death cannot be established with certainty, how does that affect the burden of proof? Can a crime scene appear too perfectly staged, suggesting guilt rather than accident? Some continue to question whether justice was truly served, or if reasonable doubt was insufficient to prevent a potentially wrongful conviction. Was there another explanation, another person involved? Or was the evidence circumstantial, though much of it was sufficient to prove what prosecutors argued, that this was the crime of a man who, when faced with losing everything he valued, chose murder over surrender? What remains indisputable is that Samira Froch, a woman who left her home in Paris for what she believed would be a better life, who loved her children and dreamed of their success, died alone and terrified in the swimming pool of her own home. Whether by accident, by another's hand, or as the jury concluded by her husband's decision, her death was a tragedy that could have been prevented if the warning signs of domestic violence had been taken seriously sooner. This case reminds us that behind every headline about wealth and glamour, there may be a story of control, fear, and desperation. It challenges us to look beyond appearances, to listen to victims when they say they are afraid, and to recognize that violence knows no economic boundaries. The Tallahassee community was left to grapple with the reality that in their most exclusive neighborhood, behind the gates and the luxury cars and the carefully curated social media posts, a woman was living in fear. Her friends knew, her family knew. But the systems meant to protect her either couldn't or didn't act in time. Adam Frock remains in a Florida prison serving his life sentence. He continues to file appeals, maintaining his innocence. The two young girls are growing up elsewhere away from the mansion where their mother died. The house has been sold. The luxury cars have been auctioned off. The glamorous life that once seemed so enviable has been revealed as a hollow facade. What happened in that house on the night of February 22nd may never be known with absolute certainty. The jury heard the evidence and made their determination. The legal process has concluded, but the human questions remain. How did a relationship that began with possibility and promise end in such tragedy? What warning signs were missed? What could have been done differently? For Samira's friends and family, the answer is simple. Someone should have protected her when she said she was afraid. Someone should have helped her escape before it was too late. The justice system eventually held someone accountable, but it came too late for Samira, and far too late for her daughters. In the end, this is not just a story about murder. It is a story about power and control, about the vulnerability of those trapped in abusive relationships, about the particular dangers faced by immigrant women in unfamiliar legal systems, and about how easily a life can be lost when warnings go unheeded. Samira's story serves as a stark reminder that domestic violence is a serious crime that demands serious attention regardless of how wealthy or seemingly perfect a relationship may appear from the outside. Justice requires us to believe victims when they express fear to act before tragedy strikes, and to recognize that luxury and violence are not mutually exclusive. The two little girls who lost their mother that cold February morning deserve to grow up knowing that her story mattered, that her life had value beyond the social media posts and designer clothes, and that the system, however imperfectly, ultimately sought to hold someone accountable for her death. We invite you to share your thoughts on this case based on the evidence presented. What do you think about the verdict? Did the prosecution prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt? Or do the unanswered questions create too much uncertainty? Subscribe to our channel to follow updates on this case and explore other mysterious and haunting true crime stories that reveal the darker side of human nature.